Welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, November 30th, and just like every week, we have a great show for you today. It's a little different in that our interview with Paul Sainer, the co-chair of the Economic Development Advisory Board, often known as EDAP, was going so well, we decided to make it a double header. So this episode is the first of two episodes featuring Paul Sainer this week and next week. So glad you're watching. Before we get to this great interview recorded just a few days ago, the news. United States Senate Majority Leader Schumer announced that the Senate will take up a foreign aid package next week that includes aid for both Israel and Ukraine. 6 senators working on the deal are specifically looking at asylum reform as well. Multiple countries announced a temporary pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel. During this pause, hostages have been released and aid has been brought into the Gaza Strip. About 85 hostages have been released by Hamas to the Red Cross, and over 150 prisoners have been released by Israel. Last week, President Biden announced a partnership with China to slow the amount of fentanyl coming into the United States. With help from the federal government, Massachusetts is resuming a work permit clinic for migrants staying in the shelter system. This week, the MBTA has shut down portions of the Green Line for tunnel and rail work, while other portions have used bus replacement services. This work is required for the MBTA to achieve its goal of clearing all subway slow zones by the end of 2024 and will be completed early next week. Last week, Governor Maura Healey announced a $50 million grant program to help decarbonize hundreds of affordable housing units. Grantees include Village Way in Brookline. Brookline's United Parish brought back its Thanksgiving dinner last week, which was halted due to the pandemic. The church hosted about 200 people for dinner, continuing a tradition going back to 1981. Yesterday, the Army Corps of Engineers, along with the City of Boston, the Town of Brookline, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, cut the ribbon on the Muddy River Flood Risk Management Project, a decades-long effort to restore the Muddy River's health, ecosystem, and flood control properties. Brookline school officials have distributed a new list of resources to help educators support students trying to understand the Israel-Hamas war. These resources include articles from UNICEF and the American Psychological Association. Folks, that's the news for the week. I'm excited this week to show this recording from a few days ago, the first of two episodes with Paul Sainer, the co-chair of the Economic Development Advisory Board. Stay tuned to hear us talk about Harvard Street, about the MBTA Community Act, and about Brookline's economic development future. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group, TV on TV. And today, as promised, we have an outstanding guest. We have Paul Sainer, the co-chair of EDAP. Paul, thanks for being on the show.
You're entirely welcome, Tommy. Glad to be here.
Paul, as always, we start with the who the heck are you question. So what have you been up to your whole life? Tell us about yourself.
I have been a resident of Brookline since 1988, living in the same home that entire time. My professional background is a little bit eclectic, but predominantly in the field of real estate investments in finance. I worked downtown for a number of years in a field called real estate syndication, and then I was a managing director at Bank Boston. I retired on disability at the age of 36 in the year 2000 because I am blind and I needed to take some time and invest in skills that would allow me to continue to be independent, including, perhaps most importantly, assistive technology. I am a founding member of EDAP, which stands for the Economic Development Advisory Board. And EDAP goes back to 1995. I've been its co-chair for about a dozen years. I have done a lot of other things in the volunteer world. I was the founding board chair of the Metropolitan Waterworks Museum, as an example. And I mentioned in an eclectic career, I did go back to work and was the commissioner of the blind in the Commonwealth for 5 years. But I am now officially retired and enjoying that very much.
That's quite a bit. And thank you for letting our viewers know you're blind. So folks, if Paul doesn't happen to be looking right at the camera, his heart, his mind is directly with you. That's one of the realities for Paul. Paul, before we talk about EDAP, we had a little meeting in the town. We call it the town meeting. And as folks know, the big item in that town meeting was the MBTA Community Act and the way in which the town complied. Paul, I want to apologize. When I spoke on the floor of town meeting in favor, asked people to terminate debate so we could have a vote. And that meant we didn't get to hear from you and so many others. Tell us what you were going to say, maybe not the full 3 minutes, but a summary of how you wanted to talk with town meeting about the MBTA Community Act compliance. What were you thinking?
EDAP spent a tremendous amount of time looking at Harvard Street from an economic development point of view. I think just one generic comment before we talk specifically about Harvard Street. A consultant, very well-regarded consultant for the town, recently concluded that Brookline presents a very difficult environment for commercial development. The zoning is not aligned with feasible scale and uses. So Harvard Street epitomizes that. While there has been recent redevelopment along Harvard Street, all of that has been outside of zoning, either 40Bs, or in the case of the very important expansion of the Coolidge Corner Theater, a very unique sort of nonprofit hometown variance from zoning is why that theater is able to be redeveloped. So the economic vitality of Harvard Street has surely been constrained by many decades of zoning being inadequate, and that's true of all of our commercial corridors. I think Harvard Street was very wisely selected by the planning department for intense study. They surely knew of the constraints around development, that our zoning was really not functional. The focus of Harvard Street during the long debate leading up to town meeting was very much centered on the commercial businesses, and that was really great. The Coolidge Corner Merchants Association, in their letter of endorsement, thanked everyone for their interest in commercial businesses. These businesses are at the sort of cornerstone of what makes Brookline commercial areas so vibrant, and they're also very important from a tax point of view. I looked at what percent of Harvard Street constitutes the commercial tax base, and I was surprised that what we ultimately voted, Tommy, was only 13% of the overall tax base. That to me suggests that there is a lot more upside for redevelopment along Harvard Street. Now, of course, when people think of the MBTA Community Act, they think about multifamily. It's important to remember that the only zoning change that was passed, the only thing that's required by that zoning change is ground level commercial. That was very, very important politically and substantively. And so now, for the first time, we have the potential that a new 4-story commercial building along Harvard Street could be developed as of right. some feel that multifamily doesn't belong along a commercial area. I very much disagree with that. I think an economic development strategy that ignores multifamily, which is the predominant use in town. Commercial only represents about 8% of the overall assessed value. So pretty much everything else is residential, and a huge portion of that is multifamily. We can't pretend that that isn't the case. And there's, in my view, in the view of, I think, everyone on EDAP, tremendous synergy in having more multifamily near businesses. Our businesses are very much impacted by the financial realities, not just of inflation hammering every expense that they have, including real estate tax, but also on the revenue side due to e-commerce. And so what we heard loud and clear from businesses is, yes, we want more pedestrians because we need more people spending money in our commercial areas. So in summary, I was ecstatic when town meeting so resoundingly voted the rezoning of Harvard Street. I should point out that the town in 2005, Tommy, the last time we finished our comp plan, prioritized the rezoning of our commercial corridors. In Harvard Street, just 2 weeks ago, was the first corridor to actually have its zoning systematically changed. So it's very exciting. I think we can learn from the experience that we've gone through and now look at how the market may react once there is a more favorable climate for redevelopment, meaning once interest rates normalize a little bit.
Now, I know we had talked about going right on to some EDAP conversation, but before we get there, I want to kind of bridge the gap and talk about hotels and why hotels are particularly valuable for economic development. As Paul, as you know, not only are they paying a high dollar per square foot valuation at the commercial rate, but of course there are also hotel taxes. So the municipality gets additional revenue. And then the thing that I want to add is hotels also are creating housing, or at the very least, they are recreating housing. The massive influx of Airbnb is a function of there not being enough hotel rooms priced at the right prices for people. And so having more hotel rooms actually makes Airbnb less attractive. Some people want to stay at an Airbnb no matter what. Other folks like myself, we'd rather stay at a hotel, but we got to find a room we can afford. And so can you talk to us a little bit about the prospects for additional hotels on Harvard Street, given the rezoning, and what those might look like? Under what circumstances might we get some hotel rooms?
I'd be really pleased to. Thank you for asking about hotels, which has been the most important commercial asset class in terms of growing our commercial tax base. Before I drop down to Harvard Street specifically, I just want to step back and say that EDAP has been sponsoring hotels going back more than 20 years to the Coolidge Corner Marriott. We sponsored the AC Hotel right over here in Cleveland Circle, Homewood Suites, along Boylston Street, as well as the Hilton Garden Inn. A new hotel is opening near the Courtyard Marriott, the Iris Hotel, and the Holiday Inn has had $25 million invested in it in a branding change that remains Brookline's largest hotel at 260 rooms. We also have a hotel that will hopefully be someday built, 200 or more keys at Waldo Durgan. So Brookline has a portfolio of over 1,000 hotel units. And obviously the market, I think because of Brookline's location, has looked very favorably on developing hotels. Operationally, our hotels did relatively very well during COVID. So along Harvard Street, now for the first time, we have hotels as a permitted use. So all of those other sites that I talked about, and there were 6, those were specifically rezoned for a hotel that was about to be proposed. And so no other commercial land in Brookline prior to Harvard Street had hotels as an allowed use. Now, a 4-story hotel is feasible. It's likely not going to be a major branded flagged hotel, but more of a boutique hotel. The parking ratios for hotels have been reduced to be consistent with what practices have been on the hotel development sites that I just mentioned. And so I wouldn't want to misread readers and suggest that hotels are going to start sprouting. But I think over time, given the strong success of that asset class in town, enterprising developers will look at more niche hotel opportunities along Harvard Street. And again, it's a great location because of the public access, because of the commercial base.
Thank you, Paul. So let's get into EDAP, the Economic Development Advisory Board. Why don't you start by giving us a little more flavor about what the heck it is and what it's been doing, at least going back several decades.
So I'm one of the original founding members of EDAP. I mentioned 1995, 28 years ago. The former superintendent of schools of Brookline, Robert Sperber, who's now deceased, who was one of my mentors, was the catalyst towards the town starting EDAP. He was very cognizant, Tommy, of the financial constraints that Proposition 2.5 imposed on municipalities. And as someone who loved Brookline schools, as having been our superintendent for years, he was concerned about where the funding would come for additional teachers. And he realized with taxes capped at 2.5%, the options are limited. Either a municipality generates new tax growth, or it goes to the voters to seek an override. New tax growth, especially new commercial tax growth, is very, very important fiscally to the town. First of all, commercial properties pay more taxes than the same value of residential. There's a commercial tax shift that the select board is going to be looking at over the next week for the next fiscal year. So commercial assets pay about 64% more in taxes than residential. Commercial properties tend not to draw as heavily on demands for town services, and they don't send kids to schools. So our most important sort of metric is how is the health of our commercial tax base relative to all other asset classes. And we've got mixed results in that regard. There were, going back 5 to 10 years, increases annually in the commercial sector as a percentage of the total levy, but that slipped back the other way. There are many different variables that go into that, but it's important for the town to have a pipeline of commercial development opportunities. But more importantly, it's important for the town to fix its zoning in our commercial areas such that something other than automobile use is the highest and best commercial tax use. I have pointed to Herb Chambers, who has invested heavily in the Audi site along Boylston Street, and who is doing the same for the BMW site along Com Ave. The reason why he does that is that obviously those businesses are successful, but there's no one beating down the door of those owners to redevelop those sites as, say, a commercial lab. Commercial labs were sprouting up all around Brookline when the market was hot going back a couple of years. but no developer would consider Brookline because our zoning doesn't permit a lab. And furthermore, no lab could be economically redeveloped at the cap that we have imposed on what can be developed on our prime commercial sites. One other, so EDAP has obviously spent a lot of time focusing on hotels. We spent more than a decade also focusing on the redevelopment of Brookline Place, which has been completed and is very successful. The largest tax-paying commercial properties in Brookline are concentrated in Brookline Place, 10 Brookline Place, and 1 and 2 Brookline Place. One important issue to highlight for the viewers is because of Brookline's location, we do have a risk associated with medical and educational nonprofits who can own real estate in Brookline. And if the owner is tax exempt and the use is tax exempt, not pay any taxes. 850 Boylston Street, which was developed long before EDAP, which was primarily occupied by Brigham and Women's, was sold 2 years ago by the developer owner to Brigham and Women's. And that property no longer pays taxes. There's a small amount of uses on the site that are not tax exempt. So when I say not any, about 90 some odd % of that property is now fully tax exempt. The net effect of that, Tommy, is that your taxes and my taxes all went up by nearly 1% as a result of that transaction. So EDAP has gone way out of its way to develop a very innovative tax certainty structure that has been utilized at Brookline Place. 2 Brookline Place is owned by Children's Hospital, and the uses there could theoretically be tax exempt. But Children's, in return for the zoning that they needed to redevelop that site, agreed to a 95-year tax certainty agreement, which is essentially a pilot or payment in lieu of tax agreement that requires them to pay the equivalent of 100% of the property's taxes in a pilot payment if and when that property had a declared exempt use. We have used that similar structure for all of the hotels developed over the last decade. We also used it for the senior living building that's being constructed by Welltower on the top of Fisher Hill. That really wasn't necessary. It was more of a belt and suspenders political thing to require them to sign a tax certainty agreement. And the reasons for that is the zoning only permits senior housing, and senior housing cannot become an exempt use. But it was important politically to continue with the practice of tax certainty agreements there. So is there something specific?
Paul, that tax certainty agreement, the town only has the leverage to bring that to the table if the developer can't do what it wants to do by right. Is that correct?
It's almost right. The opportunity the town has to negotiate benefits and protections that are not customary in zoning, and certainly a tax certainty agreement cannot be put into zoning. That opportunity is opened up to the town when the developer needs a zoning change. That's much different than whether that zoning change is by special permit or as of right. I personally believe that for a major commercial development, even if we change the zoning in advance of a developer showing up on our doorstep, that should be something that we try to negotiate, but still require special permits. So the distinction isn't what the zoning requires in the way of special permits or as of right. It's whether the zoning has already been provided. And the reason is that it's illegal to do what is called contract zoning, meaning I'll allow you to build this building if you do these other things. If the zoning's already set, the town could get in a lot of trouble withholding the ability to do something under that zoning by requiring them to do more than what that zoning requires.
So is the logical conclusion that the town might, I don't want to say should, but might look at all of the significant parcels where the town might be willing to have a significant use and just sort of, you know, preemptively make the zoning so that you can't do anything on it, but then put up a giant sign that says, hey, if you want to do more, call us, we'll talk?
Unfortunately, the commercial markets really don't work in that way. Commercial developers look at risk and return. And it takes years sometimes in Brookline to get the zoning right for a developer to then be able to do something. So if you were literally going to say to the commercial market, we're open for business, just come and talk to us, but as part of that conversation, you need to do tax certainty, very little would happen. So I think it's important for the town to make thoughtful distinctions. And let me try to give you a couple of examples of that. A huge, in the last large economic development opportunity in town for a discrete site is what is referred to as Chestnut Hill West or Chestnut Hill Village. It's the western portion of Boylston Street, Route 9, between Hammond and Hammond Pond Parkway. Those are relatively large commercial sites, like Brookline Place was. You know, we have limited remaining large commercial sites, and by that I mean more than an acre. That area that I just referenced comprises more than 7 acres, and one of those is one owner of more than 5 acres. There are a number of empty office buildings there, some of which the town, with my advice, has sort of made sort of vacant by not changing the very restrictive zoning there. Because if we did that, then the site would be encumbered by longer term leases. It wouldn't be more of a blank slate, which is what it is. So the select board have voted a charge to form a committee to look at the economic development opportunities there. I think it would be naive of the town to expect that what will ultimately be developed there will be 100% commercial, but it damn well should be substantially commercial. And so there's going to be a long discussion and negotiation with this new property owner of what is referred to as Chestnut Hill Office Park, about 5 acres. And I am certain that part of that conversation will include tax certainty. So that's one extreme. Harvard Street, you're not going to have at 4 stories large institutional quality redevelopments. Hopefully over time there could be opportunities for more than a pure hotel building. There could be opportunities for pure medical office buildings. If time permits, Tommy, I want to talk about buildings along Beacon Street that were constructed prior to zoning that are very large, that are generating significant commercial taxes to the town. Well, Paul, Harvard Street represents a balance between the two, is what I'm trying to say.
If you have another 25 minutes, we could shoot a double header. What do you think?
Sure.
Let's do it. Folks, okay. Thanks for watching Brookline Interactive. Thanks for watching TV on TV. Thanks, Paul Sainer, for coming on. And we're going to have you on next week, which we're going to film like right now, and continue the conversation. Folks, thanks for watching.